Hello and welcome to this revision guide for how to write a letter in an exam. This is an example then of what that letter might look like, or how the exam question might look, sorry. They will clearly use the word letter then in the exam question. In this case, they will give an audience, a local restaurant in this case. Complaining about bad customer service then is of course the topic. So they won't give you much to go on here, but the key ingredients of the form the letter should take, the audience it should take and its purpose are all clearly laid out for you in the exam. Here's the exam criteria then. You've got your top band at the top there, that would be grade 9 or so. And then I've gone down to band 3, you can just about see the bottom of band 2 at the bottom there, which gives you an idea of the kind of skills you need to use in this part of the test. You can see there it's divided into 2 columns, communication and organisation, and vocab, sentence structure, spelling and punctuation. You get more marks for communication and organisation, that is fulfilling the expectation of audience and purpose. And then on the right hand side, that's more of the technical stuff, your grammar, your spelling, your punctuation, your sentence construction. Here's an example then of a badly written letter. You can see an address at the top. Dear Claire, it's been such a long time since I've been in touch. There's so much to tell you. The first paragraph then is really short. The second paragraph equally, maybe 3 sentences. There's some good structural notes there. After the chaos, finally I. But you can see here this is a bad example, round about a grade 3, if you were writing something like this in the actual test. Having said that, it clearly is written in the style of a letter, not a newspaper report or speech. Here's the features then that you would need to write a letter. You can see your address would clearly go at the top right, then their address at the top there on the left. You've got a date written in full, making sure you've got your capital letters correct there. And you've got Dear Sir or Madam or Dear Mrs. Smith under that. Then you've got the main body of your letter written in red. I'll come on to how that should be structured in a second. Then you end your letter with yours sincerely if you know their name, or yours faithfully if you don't. You then sign your name and then print it underneath. If, on the very slimmest chance, you were asked to write a formal email, you pretty much use the same layout as you would a letter. The exam would know that writing letters probably isn't something you've done, so they might well say email, but to be honest, the layout's pretty much the same. Here's then a more formal version of that layout. You can see again the addresses at the top, the date, and then the Dear Sir or Madam. You then write a short opening paragraph, keeping to a minimum of around about 2 sentences, possibly 3 or 4, but certainly no more than 4 lines on your page. Then you do your main argument as paragraph number 2. This should be the largest of your paragraphs, the most in-depth you go into the main topic of your letter. Then you give a supporting argument 1, then 2. And then you might offer a counter-argument, what somebody else might say against you, in paragraph number 5 there, and then a short conclusion on the bottom summarising your points before you end with yours sincerely or yours faithfully, and indeed your name. So this will give you a really high grade. You can see a varied paragraph structure there, a clear introduction and then conclusion with planned arguments in between. Let's recap some of those points then about how a letter should look on the page.
The first thing is when you're writing a letter, you need 2 addresses. You need your address on the right-hand side, so here we see my address, and then you need the address of the person that you're writing to here on the left-hand side. Now, you might say 2 things here. You might say, I don't want to put my address in the letter, and you might say, I don't know the address of the person I'm supposed to write to. That's not important. You can make up the names and addresses and even job titles, because you can see in this example it's to Mr. Smith, the Chief Examiner. You can make all of it up. You just have to make sure that you use capital letters correctly. It's a very easy way that students drop some marks through messing up capital letters. But you can see for my address I've written 5 Banana Gate Road, and the Mr. Smith's address 15 GCSE Street. Of course, these are made up addresses. You leave a line under your address and you write today's date, the date you're writing the letter on. And then you have a formal beginning, which would be dear, Mr. Smith, or whatever the name of the person you're writing to, if you know the name of the person you're writing to, or dear sir, madam, if you don't know who you're writing to. And then you indent the next line. You can see here there's a gap before you start writing your actual letter here. And you just write your letter. Now, there's a lot of confusion sometimes about how do you end a letter. And it all comes down to this basically. If you began with a name, so you actually know the person you're writing to, Mr. Smith, then you sign off with yours sincerely. But if you began with Dear Sir or Madam, you sign off with yours faithfully. And then you'll sign your name, your signature here, and then under your signature you will print your name in capital letters, because nobody's going to be able to read this signature and know who you are. Most signatures are illegible. So you would write something like, J. McDonald in brackets Miss, if you wanted to make it clear of your gender. So that's.
As you can see then, a really clear talk through of exactly what your letter should look like on the page, so the examiner knows you got the the form absolutely spot on.
The first
So one of the things you really need to check is the formality of your writing. Checking then that you are writing in the correct formal style for the kind of letter you're being asked to write. Okay, so it is the difference of wearing sort of your civvies or your sort of leisure wear to a job interview. You don't want to be wearing the wrong formality for the occasion you're writing for. Some examples there, just to test you on that. You wouldn't believe how amazing it was. It's very much informal. It was a great disappointment that you were unable to attend. It's very formal. What a shame you can't make it. Again, informal. The historic gardens for architectural revision to behold. Formal. And I thought the town was really pretty. It's slightly informal, really, in the kind of wording there. You can see the ones that link to more of an opinion base that tend to be informal, whereas the ones that are purely factual and using quite a high range of vocab tend to be a lot more formal. Here's a grid then that gives you the kind of letters you might be asked to write in the test: letter of application, letter to grandparent, letter of complaint, letter to complaint to a large company. Please pause the video and think, well, which one, what kind of formality would be suitable for each one of those tasks? Remember, if you put the thinking in now, it means that you don't have to worry too much about it in the actual test. Another good idea of how to make writing a bit more formal is using something called connectives of reservation. Those are phrases like though, if, apart from, in spite of, for all, except for, etc. These then allow you to structure your argument in your letter in a much more formal manner. You can see an example on the bottom there of a complaint letter and my response and how I might use these connectives within that answer. Here's a much more formal letter then. You can see the layout with the addresses at the top there, dear sir or madam, and the paragraphs there are done exactly as I suggested earlier. A very formal letter, in this case responding to a parking ticket. You can see it uses a range of punctuation deliberately to get the reader's interest, and it makes clear its most important point, and then obviously builds on its argument from there, and then goes for a more sort of emotive response at the bottom. Hopefully by now you'll understand my desolation and despair. Still be using perhaps a bit of alliteration there to keep the reader's interest. You can see the main body of the letter is quite long, with a short introduction and short conclusion. So, when thinking about the letter in the exam and first setting eyes on your letter task in the test, you need to consider TAP. That's the text, that's the audience, and the purpose. As you uncover these things, you should be thinking, what should my letter look like? And indeed, how formal should my letter be? Now, it's always a good idea to think about how you would write your answer by planning it first. This could be in your head or indeed written out on the page, depending on how much time you have. You can see in this case at the top of the grid there, that's my exam question that I'm answering, and I'm now going to talk you through exactly how you might consider, how you might write your letter and what you might want to say. So first of all, you've got to work out who you are. You won't always be writing as a student. You could be writing as a parent, you could be writing as a teacher, but they'll always choose a person you're writing as that you know quite a bit about. Underneath that, you can see your 3 concerns or worries that you might talk about in priority order, numbered 1, 2 and 3. And then you can see box 4 there suggests what others might say against you. What might, in this case, the locals say against the points you want to make? What's the alternative point of view? What is the counter-argument? Underneath that, with the word however, you can see that you also need to consider how you might overcome that argument, how you might defeat the counter-argument. As I said, this wouldn't need to be written out in the actual exam. This might all just be thought of in your head before you start to make sure you're ticking off all those exam criteria boxes. So now we've learned a bit about how to plan a letter, let's think about how a formal letter might be structured and some words of advice.
So let's look at the structure of a letter, how we're going to set it out. So in the top right corner, you should have your address. They probably won't give you the address for you in the exam. In fact, they won't. So you've just got to make up an address. So it doesn't really matter. As long as you do street, town, county and postcode, you'll be fine. Okay. Then we would need the date. In a formal letter, say for example, if it was 6th of June 2016, we wouldn't put 6/6/16, we would write the date out in full, so 6th of June 2016. Then you need the recipient's name and address, so the address you're writing to. Again, you probably won't get it in the exam. If you do, copy it out, but if not, just use your brain. So for example, in this case, we would write to the train company and you could make up an address. Then we need the name of polite greeting. If you don't have the name of the person, put dear sir or madam. The S of sir and the M of madam should be capital letters. If you are given a name, put the name. So one thing students do wrong, if they were getting the name saying John Smith, for example, they would put dear John Smith. So it should be dear Mr. Smith with a comma. Then in our introduction, 1 or 2 sentences, you're going to explain why you're writing. Then you're going to have your first main point, your second main point, and your third main point. So in the letter of complaint to a train company, the first main point could be the staff were rude, the second main point could be the train was late, and the third main point could be that the toilets were disgusting, for example. It's really important in your letter, and this is where a lot of students go wrong, they will shove 5 or 6 reasons in one big paragraph. It's all cluttered, it all looks a bit of a mess. It's really important that you do 1 point, go into detail on that one point. So one point about the staff being rude, write 4 or 5 sentences. Your second main point about the toilets being disgusting, write 4 or 5 sentences on that. Your third main point about the train being late, write 4 or 5 sentences on that. Okay, then you're going to do action paragraph, which is a posh name for basically the conclusion of your letter, meaning what do you want to happen from sending this letter. You don't just want them to read it and then they put it in the bin. You want an action to come from this. So this could be you want them to apologise, you want a refund, whatever. Okay, and then you're going to put yours faithfully or yours sincerely. If it's yours faithfully, you're going to have dear sir or madam. But if you put the name of the person, for example, dear Mr. Smith, you would say sincerely, and then you would just put your name at the end. Capital letters on.
So that's how your response should look after you've planned it out and thought about the main points you want to make.
So let's look at the
So let's now look at a more detailed example here. This is then a full letter, and you're going to hear a bit of a talk through of how it might actually be written.
the model answer, the A grade letter. Okay, you can see it's structured properly. It's quite a lot on the computer. I would say for this on you writing this with a pen, it would be just over 2 pages. Okay, so we're going to read through the letter now. If you want to read it on your own, pause the video. Otherwise, I will read it through. Okay, so there's the addresses on the top. Read up my own address, and then for their address, I've put Bournemouth Train Company, Bournemouth, Dorset, BH1 1AP. So I made that completely up. There's not a company by that name. However, I'm writing to the train company, so I've just made it really simple. Dear Madam, I'm writing to inform you of my total disgust at the dreadful journey which I suffered on one of your trains last weekend. Let me get straight to the point. The service was utterly appalling and I wish to request a full refund. Firstly, my train ticket for this awful journey was booked a long time in advance. I had reserved a seat in the quiet carriage and did not want a table. Boarding the train, I found to my annoyance that your staff had decided to place my reserved ticket in a different seat. I could not bring myself to ask the heavily pregnant woman who had taken my seat to swap, so I had to place myself next to the foul toilet. Why should I have to do this? Stupidly, I had paid extra to reserve my seat. I was furious. Secondly, I was shocked by the state the train had been left in by previous passengers. 95% of the floor was covered by fast food, drink and newspapers, while my seat had a stinky stain on it. Revolted and repulsed, I had no choice but to sit on it due to the train being so overcrowded. How often is the train meant to be cleaned? It is my expectation that the mess should be cleaned up by the train staff and not for the next paying passenger to sit on. Finally, the quiet carriage on your train was far from peaceful. Rowdy children, screaming babies and drunken football fans were all competing to see who could be the loudest. Quickly, I was rudely disturbed by a group of teenagers who were throwing lager cans and verbally abusing most of the patient passengers. After complaining to the guard, I was informed that there's nothing we can do, and another member of staff suggested I should stop complaining. Around 50% of the passengers I spoke to were so fed up they terminated their journey early. How can you justify the £85 ticket for such a pathetically poor journey? Surely you wish to provide an exceptional service. Sadly, you failed on this occasion. Due to these problems caused by your terrible train service, I expect a full refund. I should not have to spend my hard-earned money on your atrocious service, which ruined my day and left me feeling exhausted and tired. Yours faithfully, Ambreen Sadiq. Okay, so there's my letter again. So it was really, although it seems quite a lot, it was actually quite simple, wasn't it? I did a very simple intro saying I want my refund. Then I just did 3 points. They put me in the wrong seat. The train was messy and the quiet carriage was really noisy. Really simple. And then I've done a saying goodbye and I want a refund and for them to get back to me. If we look at the structure that we looked at a second ago, but this time I've put my letter in the middle of it. So, writer's address was 10 Christchurch Road. Then I had their address that I made up. Then I had the date, so I didn't have 10th of the 4th, 17. I had 10th of April 2017 because it's a formal letter. Then I wasn't given a name in the question, so I'm going to put Dear Sir or Madam. Then I'm saying why I'm writing, because at my disgust at the journey, I want a refund. Then I did 4 or 5 sentences on my first main point, which was that I booked a train ticket in a particular seat and they didn't give me the right one. Then again, I'm going to do 4 or 5 sentences on my second main point, which is that the train was really messy. Then again, I'm going to do 4 or 5 sentences on my third main point, was that the train was meant to be quiet, but it was really, really loud. And then in my action paragraph, I'm saying that I want a full refund. That's what I want to happen from this letter. Then because I did Dear Sir or Madam, I put yours faithfully, and then I did my name. Really, really simple.
As you can see then, well-structured letter. This would perform really well in the actual exam. The only thing I might criticise it for is it doesn't really have a counter-argument showing that the writer understands the audience's point of view. But other than that, really, really well-structured.
The model answer, the
So how to actually write that kind of response? How would you go about constructing that for yourself? Well, here are some things you should consider. One, have you used a variety of sentences? Have you used simple, compound and complex? You can see what each of those are on the screen there with an example of how that range of sentences might be used. In a mock exam of your own, you might well want to highlight each of those three colours in your own response to check you have used all three kinds of sentences. Don't worry if you're not quite sure what a complex or compound is, just do your best just to check as best you can that all three are there. Probably best to start off with the complex ones with commas, and then do the simple ones, and then presumably any that are left over are likely to be the compound ones. You might then want to check you've used ambitious language, that is high-level vocabulary, to really get the examiner's attention and show off what you can do. We've got words like diabolical, embarrassed and ashamed in the example on the board there. So underline any effective words that you think you've used. Those are words that you think, yep, I thought about that word, I really tried hard to get the best word I possibly could into my answer. Then think about paragraphs. Have you structured your response? Is it all as one block? If it is, you've not used paragraphs. And equally, hopefully they should be short and long paragraphs being clearly used. Short introduction, long second paragraph, and then right on the bottom a short conclusion. Better answers will also link their paragraphs. You can see the word haunt is repeated at the end of one paragraph, then the beginning of the next. That's a really straightforward then link between my paragraphs to make sure my writing flows. I need to think about that I'm using consistent tone. Do I jump between formal and informal throughout? Ideally, the whole thing should be in the same tone that's suitable for your target audience. Next up, punctuation. Have you used a range of punctuation within your response? Have you shown off that you can use question marks, brackets, semicolons, colons? As you can see on the screen, I'm also mentioning capitals. This is normally a real issue with letters. You've got to use them correctly in the address, the dear sir at the beginning, the yours sincerely at the end, and any names you've used throughout. So just double check all your capital letters are accurate. Remember, this is an English test, so that basic form punctuation should be absolutely correct. Okay, have you used an imaginative or creative idea in your argument? Is it interesting to read? Is it effective? You can see there I've looked at sort of exaggerating or how awful it would be if you found a hair in your dinner. You can see the exaggeration is clear using the brackets and the exclamation marks. So you can't go too mad with this, but the idea is to make your letter interesting and effective to read. This is an exam, of course, not an actual letter to a real audience. Okay, that's gone through some ideas that you might consider as you wrote your letter, just things to check through or consider as you wrote it. Here are some other techniques then to really impress the examiner.
It's really going to push your grades up, so we want to be as confident using DeForest as this guy here is in the image. Okay, one way to impress the examiner is by pretending to care. Okay, so like this guy really being emotionally involved. Okay, so what I mean by that is whatever the question is that's thrown at you, care deeply about it. Why? Well, because if you pretend to care just for 45 minutes or an hour, it will show in your writing. I realise that many of you in this video, we don't care about trains. It's not a particularly exciting topic. But if you pretend that you do, it will make your writing far more impressive. Okay, another tip is that it is okay to cheat. Okay, so what I mean by that is obviously you're not going to copy the person's next to you. But what I mean is that you can lie, make stuff, exaggerate in your letter. So by putting made up facts, figures, statistics and quotations into your writing, it makes the writing seem far more interesting and convincing. No one cares if you're telling the truth or not. So the examiner, if you put a statistic in your answer, the examiner at home is not going to start going on Google or Wikipedia to check it. So here's an example. As 50% of the men on the train were bald, the windy weather gave them a lot to complain about. Okay, so obviously that's a little bit daft, but given a percentage does make it seem more convincing and more interesting and almost like it has a bit of fact by it. So if you ever see those adverts where it will say 95% of dentists think this toothpaste is the best one. So if you put a bit of sort of knowledge, a bit of statistics behind it, it seems your answer is a bit more credible. Okay. Another tip: don't be afraid to be over the top. We're going to be over top by using de Forest. Okay, so you may have done this before in lessons with your English teacher, but here is de Forest. So it's direct address, so referring to the reader using we or you. Alliteration, a group of words beginning with the same letter or sound. Facts, something which can be proven to be true. Opinions, a belief which cannot be proven to be true, someone's own ideas. Rhetorical question, any question in the piece of writing which doesn't require an answer. Emotive language, words which elicit a powerful response. Statistics, facts and data used to support a point, which I just talked about it. Or rule of three or power of three, list of three things in a sentence. So they do this a lot in adverts. So, for example, Mars bar makes you work, rest and play. Okay, so here's de Forest again, but here I'm now going to show you the ones that I used in my letter. And you should be using whatever letter question you get in the exam, try to do a little de Forest plan before you get going. We're going to get rid of fact and opinion because, to be honest, a lot of what you say is going to be fact and opinion anyway in the letter. So we probably don't need to plan this one because a lot of it's going to be opinion, a lot of it's going to be facts. So for example, I went on the train last weekend would be a fact. An opinion would be I didn't like your service. So that's going to happen anyway. So direct address, remember that's using you or we. Sadly, you failed on this occasion. So you makes it sound like the letter is going directly to the person. It's going to be more effective. So sadly, you failed on this occasion and on this letter to do a good service. So alliteration, which makes the text catchy and sticks in the reader's head. Pathetically poor journey. Rhetorical question. How can you justify the £85 ticket for such a pathetically poor journey? Emotive language. Total disgust at the dreadful journey. So I could have put I didn't like the journey, wasn't very good. But disgust and dreadful really make it sound awful and really stick in the reader's head. Statistics. Around 50% of the passengers I spoke to were so fed up they terminated their journey early. Rule of three, the floor was covered by fast food, drink and newspapers. So the mark scheme says to get the high grades you need to use stylistic devices. So here we've got 6. So 6 really good sentences that all the way through the letter the examiner can see we know how to do stylistic devices, we know how to use de Forest. Basically it's going to be a really, really good letter but if you use these devices.
Now your teacher might well teach you different devices to use. In my class I tend to teach a Forest with the double R, but in essence the examiner doesn't really mind what devices you use as long as you're using some that are deliberately being used to capture your audience's attention and get them interested in what you're writing.
It's really going to
So here's once again the exam criteria. You've just had a talk through of how best to achieve those highest grades, that is 12 and 8 out of this 20-mark question. I hope you found that really useful. Thank you very much for listening.